Two people are born on the same day, in the same city, with nearly identical genes. Twins, same DNA, more or less. Fast forward 40 years, and one of them looks a decade younger than the other. Same genetic blueprint, completely different faces, completely different energy, completely different bodies. What happened? You'd think the answer has to be genetics. It's not. Or rather, it's genetics far less than you'd expect. The single biggest lever separating those two people, according to a growing pile of aging research, is something almost embarrassingly ordinary: sleep. Not how much they slept, how well. Sounds too simple. It is not simple. And once you understand what's actually happening in your body every single night, you'll never look at a good night's sleep as some soft, optional wellness trend again. Your genes are the script, sleep is the editor. Here's the first thing that surprises people. Genetics is not really a fixed sentence you're handed at birth. It's closer to a script that your body is constantly editing, turning certain genes up, turning others down, based on what's happening to you day to day. The field that studies this is called epigenetics, and one of its strangest, most useful discoveries is something called the epigenetic clock. An epigenetic clock is a way of measuring your actual biological age by looking at chemical markers on your DNA, completely separate from the number on your birth certificate. Two 40-year-olds can have wildly different biological ages according to this clock. One might read as 34, the other might read as 49. Same chronological age, 15-year gap in how old their bodies actually behave. And here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. Sleep quality is one of the strongest predictors researchers have found for which way that clock swings. Not exercise alone, not diet alone. Sleep, specifically the deep, uninterrupted kind, shows up again and again as one of the most powerful levers on biological age that anyone has ever measured. What actually happens while you're unconscious? Most people picture sleep as downtime, the body idling, nothing much happening. That's almost the exact opposite of the truth. While you're unconscious, your brain runs something called the glymphatic system, discovered and properly mapped only in the last 15 years or so, which acts like a nightly power wash for your brain. Cerebrospinal fluid flushes through brain tissue at a much faster rate during deep sleep than while you're awake, physically clearing out metabolic waste products, including a protein called beta amyloid that's strongly associated with cognitive decline later in life. Skip enough deep sleep, night after night, and that waste doesn't get cleared as efficiently. It's less like your brain resting, and more like your brain running its own maintenance crew on the night shift, and the crew only shows up if you actually let them clock in. Meanwhile, somewhere else entirely, your pituitary gland is timing the release of growth hormone to sync almost exactly with your deepest stage of sleep, called slow-wave sleep. Growth hormone isn't just for children getting taller. In adults, it drives tissue repair, muscle maintenance, and this is the part that hits differently: a big chunk of your skin's collagen production. The phrase beauty sleep sounds like a marketing slogan invented to sell face cream. It is, unfortunately for the cynics among us, actually rooted in real biology. Collagen synthesis measurably ramps up during deep sleep, and chronically poor sleep is linked to thinner skin, slower wound healing, and visibly faster development of fine lines. The telomere connection. Here's a fact that tends to make people sit up a little straighter. Telomeres are the small protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes, often compared to the plastic tips on shoelaces that stop them from fraying. Every time a cell divides, its telomeres shorten slightly. Once they get too short, the cell can no longer divide properly, and this shortening process is one of the core biological mechanisms of aging itself. Multiple studies tracking sleep duration and quality against telomere length have found a consistent pattern. People who sleep poorly, particularly those who get less than 6 hours a night on a regular basis, tend to show shorter telomeres for their age compared to people with consistently good sleep. Some research has found the gap in telomere length between good sleepers and poor sleepers of the same chronological age to be roughly equivalent to several years of accelerated cellular aging. Your chromosomes, in a very literal biochemical sense, can be aging faster simply because of what's happening or not happening in your bedroom. Why duration alone is misleading you. Here's where most people's mental model of sleep goes wrong, and it's worth sitting with because it changes what you should actually do about all of this. Most people track sleep purely by hours. 8 hours, good. 6 hours, bad. That's not wrong exactly, but it's incomplete in a way that matters. Sleep isn't one continuous state. It cycles through stages roughly every 90 minutes. Light sleep, deep slow wave sleep, and REM sleep. each doing different biological jobs. Deep sleep is where most of that physical repair and collagen production happens. REM sleep is where a huge amount of memory consolidation and emotional processing happens. If you sleep 8 hours but keep getting jolted out of deep sleep by noise, alcohol, or a poorly timed alarm, you can rack up plenty of total hours while barely touching the stages doing the real anti-aging work. Fragmented sleep with normal duration can, in some of the research, look biologically worse than shorter but more consolidated sleep. It's not just how long you're out, it's how intact each cycle gets to run. This is why two people who both technically get 8 hours can age at completely different rates. One is getting 8 hours of deep, cycling, uninterrupted sleep. The other is getting 8 hours technically in bed, but fragmented into a dozen shallow pieces by a partner snoring, a phone buzzing at 2 a.m., or a room that's slightly too warm. The practical layer, what actually moves the needle. So here's where this stops being trivia and starts being useful. If sleep quality is genuinely one of the biggest anti-aging levers available to an ordinary person doing nothing exotic, what actually improves it? Temperature turns out to matter more than almost anything else people obsess over. Your core body temperature needs to drop by roughly 1 to 2 degrees to initiate and sustain deep sleep. A bedroom that's too warm is one of the single most common, most fixable reasons people get plenty of hours, but poor quality. Somewhere around 65 degrees Fahrenheit tends to come up again and again in sleep research, as close to an ideal range for most adults, though it varies person to person. Light exposure timing is the next big lever, and it's not just about avoiding screens before bed, though that helps. It's about getting bright light, ideally sunlight, within the first hour of waking up. This single habit does more to anchor your circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour clock, than almost anything else. Because morning light exposure is the primary signal your brain uses to time the release of melatonin roughly 14 to 16 hours later that same night. Consistency beats almost everything else in isolation. Going to bed and waking up at wildly different times across the week, the thing researchers sometimes call social jet lag, forces your circadian rhythm to constantly readjust, similar in effect to crossing time zones repeatedly without ever actually traveling anywhere. A consistent sleep window, even one that's slightly shorter than ideal, tends to outperform a longer but wildly inconsistent one. And then there's the alcohol myth, worth mentioning because it trips up so many people. Alcohol makes you fall asleep faster, which fools people into thinking it improves sleep. It does the opposite where it counts most. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep and fragments deep sleep in the second half of the night, which is exactly the stage doing the collagen production and cellular repair work described earlier. A nightcap that helps you fall asleep faster can quietly be sabotaging the exact biological processes you're trying to protect. The technology racing to measure all of this. Here's where it gets genuinely exciting, because the tools for tracking sleep quality have gone through an almost unbelievable transformation in a very short window of time. 20 years ago, measuring sleep stages accurately required an overnight stay in a lab, wired up with dozens of electrodes in a setup called polysomnography. Today, a ring you wear on one finger or a strap on your wrist can estimate your sleep stages, heart rate variability, and even skin temperature fluctuations with a level of accuracy that would have sounded like science fiction to sleep researchers a generation ago. Devices like these are now generating enormous data sets, millions of nights of sleep data across huge populations that researchers are mining to find patterns that individual sleep labs, studying a handful of participants at a time, never could have uncovered. Some of the more fascinating recent frontiers involve closed-loop stimulation, technology that detects when your brain enters deep slow-wave sleep and delivers extremely subtle acoustic tones, timed precisely to enhance the depth of those slow brain waves without waking you up. Early research on this kind of targeted memory and deep sleep enhancement has shown it can boost the very slow-wave activity linked to physical repair and memory consolidation, essentially amplifying the exact biological process this whole video has been describing in real time while you sleep. And then there's the frontier that sounds almost like science fiction, but is being actively researched right now. Sleep as a delivery mechanism for anti-aging interventions. Because so much cellular repair, hormone release, and waste clearance is concentrated into specific sleep stages. Some researchers are exploring whether future therapies, from precisely timed light exposure to targeted compounds, could be administered specifically during deep sleep windows to maximize their effect, essentially using your own nightly biology as the most efficient possible delivery system the body already has built in. The twist nobody expects. Here's the detail that tends to surprise people most, and it's a genuinely hopeful one. Unlike your genetic sequence, which you cannot change, sleep quality is almost entirely something you have influence over. Starting tonight, you can't rewrite the DNA you were born with, but the epigenetic clock, the one that actually seems to track more closely with how fast you age, responds to behavior, and sleep sits near the very top of the list of behaviors it responds to. That reframes the entire question this video opened with. Those two twins, same DNA, one aging visibly slower than the other, weren't playing a genetic lottery that only one of them won. In a huge number of documented cases, the twin who slept better, more consistently, with fewer disruptions to deep sleep, was quietly running a more effective anti-aging protocol than any cream, supplement, or procedure on the market, every single night for free, without ever thinking of it that way. Genetics loads the gun. For decades, that phrase got used to describe things like diet and exercise. It turns out one of the biggest fingers actually on the trigger has been sitting in your bedroom the entire time, waiting for you to simply close the door, turn down the temperature, and let your brain run the maintenance shift it's been trying to run every single night of your life.